Our first reading is our last reading from that second book of Samuel for this cycle. And it goes into this story of David calling for that census, that numbering of the people. And very interesting story, a number of things that we can take from it, but there's a lot of perhaps misunderstandings about it too, or ways to think about it wrong. And as we hear this story, first, I think it is important to note that it is not wrong to do a census or to register the people in and of itself. There are other places in Scripture where this does take place, and it's not seen as wrong or sinful. But it is likely then sinful in this regards because of the intention or the purpose behind it. And we don't know exactly necessarily what was going on in the mind of David or the leaders of the army in doing this, but there are a number of possibilities that have been proposed. One, that David was being prideful. He wanted to say, look at this great people that I am king of whom I have authority over them, and or how powerful the army could be to be my protection against any enemy or any incursion, and to see that reliance on his own power rather than on that power, that protection of God, who is the one who established him on that throne. But I think there are perhaps other aspects of this as well, and perhaps it could be seen as elements of corruption or greed within David and the leaders, the army. And part of the ways you can look at that is because when they return with this report of the number of people registered, Joab, again the military leader, comes back and says, in Israel there are 800,000 men fit for military service, in Judah 500,000. Most scholars would say that those numbers are vastly overinflated, that neither Israel nor Judah probably had that many men fit for military service. It would be rather outrageous to claim that, or are they claiming basically every possible person, whether they are actually fit or not? And if that's the case, if there's this overinflation, part of it, again, could be seen for that pride of David to appeal to his ego, but part of it could be seen as this attempt of fraud to say, well, yeah, we're going to inflate that number of this is how many people could be fit for military service. Therefore, my king, you should increase the budget to the military so that we can procure more arms and armor and horses and chariots and all these other things, and so that we can outfit this many men, knowing that likely they would never actually get that far, that the money would come in their pockets, and then they would purchase for themselves houses and lands or whatever else that they would do. Potentially great deal of fraud involved in something like this. And the second part of this is that punishment that the Lord then inflicts. And though here in the text, through that prophet Gad, it says, again, the Lord will offer three alternatives, and whichever one David chooses, the Lord will inflict it upon you. And here again, it is easy to misunderstand that the Lord is the one who inflicts that punishment, but more often we can understand that more as saying that sin has its consequences. It has its negative consequences. There are consequences to sin. And not in some like karmic sense, if you do bad things will happen. But when we sin, we are causing pain and suffering in our own lives, in the world, in the lives of others. And that suffering and that pain and that brokenness is going to have its negative effects. And so if you look at this as saying this numbering of the people, this perpetuation of great fraud is going to have negative effects. And it's going to have likely a number of different negative effects. If you are defrauding the kingdom and the budget of the people and putting this money towards fraud or waste, then chances are that money is not available for other things. Or in this case, could have 3 years of famine come upon your land. If all of your budget is going to the military in a fraudulent endeavor, you might not have the budget for agriculture or establishing reserves of grain or whatever else these things might be. And that famine is going to affect the people. That fraud, that defrauding of the government is going to have real negative consequences, and people will starve. Or you could say you flee from your enemy for 3 months while he pursues you. You could say, yeah, I'm putting all of this money into my military, into my army. I am imagining that I have this very powerful army, and then therefore I am more perhaps aggressive against the neighboring enemy, or maybe I even attack the neighbors and don't have the actual forces to defend, or that they attack back and overwhelm us, or whatever the case may be. Or even in doing so to say that maybe it is civil war. Maybe there is this growing concern within the people about the waste and the misuse of funds, and there is a revolt that rises up. And these are real consequences when that fraud and that theft and that deceit become rampant in governments and society. Or that there might be this 3 days pestilence. And again, I think similar to that first one, if there are these natural disasters over which no government, no people really has control, even then, if that fraud and that waste is to that extent that you would think you'd be able to respond with things like National Guard or other things to help support infrastructure or protect people, if that's not present, then that pestilence or that natural disaster, that hurricane or flood or fire, is going to be far, far more destructive. If we look at this passage in that light, we can see this reality of how any of these sins are going to have negative consequences on a very broad scale. And yet it is so easy for people in our world, and even Christians and even Catholics, to say and to defraud the government in so many different ways, whether on their own taxes, whether on these different types of programs, whether things like in our own state, we know vast amounts of fraud through some of those COVID programs or some of these other different things to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars to billions of dollars in our state, and causing now perhaps seeing some of those negative effects of unrest, of hunger, of failure to meet the needs of the people. We must be focused on doing justice, of not engaging in our own ego or selfishness or pride, not focusing to enrich ourselves at the expense of others, or imagining that, oh, it's just the government's money, it's not a big deal. These things are always going to have consequences. And the higher it goes and the more those in power engage in it, the bigger those consequences will be. We must proclaim and live that truth of the gospel. We must recognize that need for justice and truth in our own lives and demand it in our politicians as well. Because sin always has negative consequences, and it will always affect many, many innocent lives.